Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Eckerman, one of the co-founders of Eric's House. I have the great pleasure today to introduce you all to Paul Rosenfeld, who's one of our Eric's House members. And Paul, I'll never forget when we first met. It was a phone meeting. I was preparing for our spring men's group, and Marianne told me about this guy that she'd just spoken to, and she kind of went through the litany of your losses and the things you were going through, and it was just staggering. And I was so I like to speak with anybody who's considering coming into the men's group so they understand what it's about, and how we run these closed groups. And I just felt so intimidated. It was, your losses are just overwhelming. So why don't we start with you introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about what you've gone through? I guess it's all pretty much in the last 12 months, right? The last, you're close, maybe a little more than that.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so in August of 2020, Zach, my 21-year-old son, passed suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition where both of his valves were on one side of his heart, and there were no symptoms up until then. And then that February of this year, I actually got diagnosed with prostate cancer. And in May of this year, Ivana, my son, took his life. And 16 days later, I had my prostate removed. And then right after that, I had the world's worst panic attack, or at least that's what I thought. And then I found my way to Greg and Marianne through a mutual friend, Michelle Moore, which I'm incredibly thankful for. So yes, Greg, it's been a year I wouldn't put on anyone.
I just can't imagine. I mean, not to devolve into any kind of biblical references, but felt pretty Jobian to me.
Me too.
I can only, actually, I can't imagine. I I was so happy to know that you were in a place where you felt like you could sort of stick your neck out and join us in the men's group. So when I was asked for this fundraiser to talk about men in grief and what's different about how men grieve and women grieve, I actually thought of you right away because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is that I think it's inspirational that you still kept it together after everything you've gone through. But beyond that, as I recall, when you first joined us, you, like me, when at an early stage in my grief journey, were pretty much a stereotypical man coming into one of these circumstances. You really weren't entirely sure you wanted to be there, and the way it came across and the things that you were struggling with was totally understandable. But there's a lot of guys out there like us, and even though this is a stereotype, like a lot of stereotypes, it works pretty well statistically. I mean, most guys kind of fall into a category like this. So I wanted to kind of look at that side of your experience. The stereotype for men is that we tend to internalize our grief. We get bought into this thing that we're raised with, right? Man up, suck it up, move on, try to maintain control at all costs, and typically wind up burying ourselves in work so that we've got some relief from the grief, which is still all bottled up. So if you would share some of your experiences with that, and especially in the context of coming into the men's group.
Yeah. And I think I did fit a lot of those stereotypes. Maybe not all, and maybe not as much as others. I don't know. Maybe it feels that way. One of the main reasons that I was let's say, behaving or acting the way you're saying, Greg, is because the losses were just so fresh. So that was just on top of what everything you're saying, Greg. But it's really hard to go through a journey with any support group or any therapist or your friends and family. There's these different stages of grief, and I was certainly, and still am, I think, in many ways, at the earliest stages. And those early stages, as you know, are things like just you're. The other thing, though, I think really pertinent to what you're saying is, I was very fortunate and blessed in one way. I don't think so in most ways, but in this way, when I came to Arizona, which was still early, very early, it was just a little over a month after Ivana passed. I had what I can only call a mystical experience at the top of a mountain as I was hiking with our mutual friend, Michelle. And for 3 hours on the way down the mountain, I can honestly say here that I was transformed in many ways. Still a journey. It's probably, the very beginning of that journey. But afterward, I'm not the same person. And a lot of what happened for me was this upwelling, if you will, of feelings that, a lot of the negative emotions that we have, the shame and the guilt and the anger, the things that we repress, whether it's a man or a woman, but I think, like you're saying, Greg, definitely, probably more men. They were released. My children were with me on that mountain. I was very blessed for that. And I wound up having very different set of feelings by the time the whole episode ended, things like bliss and joy and peace, a lot of peace. And a big part of that experience was, a very big part of it was a reflection that I just was not alone. I played in my head spontaneously all the people that helped me get to that point of this upwelling, people like Greg and Marianne and Michelle, and all the other people in my life, my friends and my family and my children. And I knew we were all connected, whether it was in this world or the next world. And that really gave me a level of energy and frankly, motivation that I know many of us just don't have. But it gave me that energy to keep going, to continue being open and reaching out, to sharing what happened. And I wish that on everybody that is, especially to your point, Greg, men who are sitting there by themselves and feeling like we all have to take it alone.
And as I recall, Paul, that, from our conversation in our men's group, it's the men's groups become kind of an interesting little micro community, I think, in many ways. And as I recall, that was a big change for you, that sort of opening to your spiritual side, to even be able to embrace the idea that that your kids are still with you, and that you have an ongoing relationship with them. And we see a lot of that. It seems like most people fall into one of two camps. Are either really angry with God, or maybe have turned their backs on any concept of a higher power or life after this life, or they dive into it and just sort of completely immerse themselves, and almost to the point where that becomes their whole frame of reference for their grief. But I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the men's group, because that's one of my objectives for our conversation, is to kind of explain to people, to men that might be considering this, that it's probably a more viable option than they may first realize. And especially if you've never been in that kind of relationship with a small group of men. We typically we meet for 9 sessions once a week. And in the course of that, of course, we're all peers, I guess. We've all had major loss. Typically we've lost either a child or a sibling. and it's rocked us to our core. And so that, that allows us to kind of all start on a similar level. But your case was interesting because your grief was so fresh. And that, that was another thing that I found just very impressive. I remember in my case, I wasn't in a position to do something like join a men's group probably for the first year of our loss. There's, I get the question a lot, is this too soon for me to join a men's group? And I never know what to say because I can't answer that. We're all different and our grief journeys are all unique. But I'm so glad that you were able to put yourself in a position to do that and kind of open up to the group over the course of the 9 weeks. I really felt in that particular group, we connected and we opened up to one another, supported one another. It was really interesting. And then your trip to Arizona, as I recall, was probably 2/3 of the way through that men's group, something like that. It was still very early for you.
It was early.
Yeah. I just, I love that story, by the way, that the literal going to the mountain, it is it's a classic metaphor, but it's a beautiful story. And you could see it in your demeanor immediately. We spoke the next week. It was really dramatic. I wonder if you could just briefly kind of recap some of the aside from the men's group, some of the services that Eric's House provided that were of benefit to you.
Sure. Well, to your first point, the group itself was very helpful. I think when things are fresh, and even if they're not, we all have a tendency, and like we talked about, especially men, to bottle things up. And ultimately, grief, as opposed to mourning, right? Mourning external is the external expression of grief being internal. It's something that I think our predisposition is to bottle it up and not talk about it. And if we're going to heal, I've learned, unfortunately, that you have to get this out. It just has to come out. It could come out through writing. It could come out through talking with others. I saw my ex-wife, the way she was handling things. And so much of it was talking with our friends and family, just so much of it. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't like that exactly. It wasn't the same way. The support group was a big part of helping me. And it's just so easy to shut people out and to shut out the world and to know that there's a weekly session and that there's other guys like me. And then you get on the call, it's like a goal, maybe goal's the wrong word. It's a forcing mechanism. It's a forcing mechanism because if you don't have them, I'm sure, unfortunately, many of us on the call, you can curl up in a ball on the couch and really wither away. You want to, with all the feelings that well up, you just really want to. So I think having that forcing function is important, but also what the support group really was helpful for was just hearing that there are other people in similar situations and the pain, unfortunately, that we're all sharing. And I'll tell you, whatever stereotypes that people have about men were really blew me away in that support group. And even for me, and I think I'm in many ways pretty open, maybe because some of the guys were farther along, maybe just because they're human beings that really needed to get out what they're feeling. But it was really helpful for me to hear what they're going through, to understand that we're all doing this, we're all in this terrible journey together, and get that support that way. But that wasn't where, as you know, Greg, that wasn't where the services from Eric's House ended. In fact, one of the biggest things I give credit to is Jamie Silver, who was helping with tapping. And when I came to Arizona, I think it was Mary Ann. She's like, I want you to meet with this woman, Jamie. I didn't know why. I was open to anything, right? Anything that can help me with my pain. And it was really terrible. I was just at the lowest of low points. I just had that panic attack that I told you about, and I had a feeling of overwhelm that I just knew at that moment. I thought I really did let go. I never understood the concept of letting go until it happened to me. It wasn't an intellectual thing, it just happened. I just knew that I wasn't up to the task of surviving this without help. And that's what brought on the panic attack. And when I went to Arizona and met with Jamie, I'm like, who are you? And what are you going to do to help me? And she was is such a wonderfully warm soul. And we instantly bonded. And I looked at that first tapping session as kind of opening the door. It cracked open the door from my grief and pain. And 2 days later is when, as I say, I went to the mountain. And were it, I think, not for what Jamie helped me do. And in that first session, it was also miraculous. So I give a lot of credit to Jamie, who I'm still in touch with on a regular basis as well.
I remember we were talking about, you also did some grief companioning.
I did.
With Marianne and me. And I remember as we were talking, you were saying, hey, I'm going to try this tapping thing. Sounds a little woo-woo, but what have I got to lose? And that's right. You know, it's, I guess you look at the array of losses we encounter when we lose someone we love so much to one of these tragic causes, that, you know, you sort of feel like, well, what the heck? You know, I'm willing to try anything that helps me deal with this. And I think that's what brings a lot of, especially of men. You know I'm stereotyping. I should say I've met a number of women who grieve in a very masculine fashion as well. And I've met some men who are able to kind of tap into their feminine side as they deal with their grief. So it is a stereotype, but it does work for a lot of us. So Paul, you've been inspirational in a lot of ways for me, and a big part of it is to know, you know, we keep in touch periodically to hear how you have continued to kind of progress and focus on self-care and dealing with your cancer issues and sort of with the world at large, and with one of those big ripple effect losses that I was talking about is that many of us find that values and priorities that we held before no longer hold the same place, and that, you know, that part of what we're free to do is to examine what we really care about in life, and you know, how we define ourselves. So I'm wondering if we could kind of wrap up here and just kind of hear a little bit about what you're going through now.
Sure. Yeah, I think we all know that when something like this happens, your identity of who you are just gets shot, and just shot. It's just the biggest part of us living is not there anymore. And at the same time, I think I had an even extra burden in that I'm still right now fighting cancer. So the surgery was not successful. It's still there. And I'm having to deal with both the grief and the loss of my children, as well as trying to survive. And all the while asking myself the question, do I really want to? Like, what's the... And when you don't have your identity as a parent anymore, it's easy to say this, but I am proud of a little bit toward figuring out that question about, what purpose should I still have? I essentially went on disability for the first time. Never would imagine that I'd be the kind of person to take disability up. It's, I think, another aspect of us feeling like we should get support when we need it. That's what it's there for. I moved from California to Florida, to a place where my friends and family are here to surround me even more. I always had this fantasy every morning I'd wake up and go to some greasy spoon diner after walking on the beach and have coffee with all the old timers, and we'd sit and we'd read the paper and we'd bullshit. And no time like the present. I think another thing that so the other aspect I think of identity that's changed a lot is me reaching for a higher purpose. And I know what my children would wish for me, which is to be happy, but also to continue the things that were important to them. Things like the nonprofits and the organizations that they cared the most about. So in tandem with not working in my job any longer, and essentially on my way to giving up my 30-year career in technology and a successful one that made a lot of money, I just realized that stuff's just not really important anymore. And maybe I'm blessed at this point to have the opportunity to pursue other paths, but we all have needs and wants. And I think now it's easy for me to see what's more important, maybe too late, but better late than never. So it is a journey to figure out, how to move on and go on. And there's a lot of different ways that I've been trying to tackle it. Some successful, some not. But I feel like we all have to go through that.
Well, Paul, it has been great catching up with you. I always feel like when we talk, I always come away from our conversations with some fresh insights and a real feeling of gratitude. So thank you, and thank you for sharing your story. I've really enjoyed this. I think we should do it again. We'll follow the next phase.
I mean, I have nothing but the most grateful feelings for you and Marianne and Jamie and the whole organization. I can claim as of today, were it not for this organization, I don't know that I'd be here. Were it not for coming to Arizona and participating in the services that you have, and for my beautiful friend Michelle, and for her introducing me, and just thank you.
Well, thank you. Take care.